Hello and welcome to the Marianopolis podcast. What you're about to hear is a conversation between me and Bhromor Rahman, our very dear editor-in-chief here at the Marianopolis World Review, our school's newspaper. So I first got in contact with Bhromor and through our Facebook conversation. We talked 1 hour about politics, and he happens to be an immigrant from Bangladesh. Technically not an immigrant, he's born here, but his family's from Bangladesh, and thought would go very well in the podcast, and I invited him onto the show, and was I think the funnest conversation I've ever had with anyone. I hope you'll enjoy listening to it as much as I did the interview. And even though the audio quality is not the best in this episode, I think the content is just hilarious and very informative. So I hope you enjoy. Yeah, well, let's welcome to the podcast. You're our third guest. Start by introducing yourself, talk about yourself a little bit.
Me? Okay, it's only me. Well, my name is Bhromor Rahman. Well, it's a bit complicated to say it in English because there's no H's, but there's several H's in my name. But I'm not me, but my mom is from Bangladesh, but I'll have some cultural ties from over there. So that's what I'm mainly going to talk about today. Stuff happening back in the country. Talk about maybe society, compare it a little bit to society over here, and basically say how good we have it here. Honestly, it's true. Like, no matter what you say, you talk about, we do have it good here. You can talk about whatever you want, literally anything. Name an issue, like police brutality, no comparison. Like, whatever you want to say here compared to Bangladesh, no comparison. Violence, no comparison. Strikes, no comparison. The class discrepancy, that's like a really interesting thing I want to talk about. In general, everything in related to basically the two societies, like how different it is, the culture, the way we think, right? And how it's incompatible in many ways over here to live like we do over there. But yeah, that's in general. People in Marianopolis, they know me as the editor-in-chief of the World Review, the school newspaper, right? Like, we report on Congress, we write opinion articles once in a while, and that's pretty much it. And otherwise, I'm a big weeb, but that's a side note in this case. All right, well, that's it for me.
All right, then I just have a quick question that was not planned. So why do you think that we have this perception about our society being so much worse in a way than like other parts of the world? Like our media has this tendency to, doesn't mean like only our media, like every single media have the tendency to only focus on bad things. Steven Pinker talked about this in his book. Like, since the 1950s, 1960s, the word connotation in media usage has always been on a negative trend. So, what do you think, like, the situation actually is? Like, how bad is it actually in our society? Well, in Western society, let's say Canada, and in your society back in Bangladesh?
Well, I think that it's relatively easy to explain. First of all, people like to focus on bad things. Like, we love drama. We love we don't like looking at when something goes well, it's how it's supposed to go. So it's like a Tuesday morning. Everything is fine, right? If things go bad, that's when people pay attention, right? Because it wasn't supposed to go like that, right? It's abnormal. It's something different. It's not supposed to. That's not supposed what was supposed to happen, right? So we always focus on that, right? When there's and whenever there's like a scandal, people are very high on emotions, right? We run on emotion. When there's something outrageous that happens, like, oh my God, this someone was arrested and he's like a person of color, and it's he was just walking in the street. Like, people often they don't look at what happened behind, like, the story, and they just hear something and they run high on emotion and they go and they're like, oh, this is an outrage, and they light the streets on fire. Okay, like, that's people. We're very knee jerk. Obviously in the East too, but like in the West, we're very knee jerk in terms of our reactions. We don't really, a lot of people don't really look at like the story deeper behind, because whenever you see a story that's like even remotely a bit outrageous, you just you just react to it, and it's very in that way very emotion based and reaction based, and I think that in many ways it's a condition of the human, but I think that's like in general that explains it why and why the media focuses on that. Well, as I said, it's the media, their job is to report on the news, but obviously, I mean, what gets more views, what gets more clicks, right? Like it's the like eventually as a journalist, you want people to watch your show, you want people to read your articles, right? So you talk about everything you think is wrong. You write like outrageous articles with like questionable evidence to stir controversy, and because you want people to read. Like that's, I mean, I can say it myself, like I don't run a large publication, I run like a teeny tiny publication. Like we'd be happy if we got 1,500 people to read any on a given day any of our articles. But I'm not gonna say that we don't do that too. Like I definitely try to gear it up whenever I can, because the ad revenue, clicks, stuff like that, right? So it's something that I think that, and obviously that doesn't help society in general. Like it doesn't contribute to better society, because people, like obviously people always running high on emotion and reacting to every little event that happens, and not looking further in depth what's going on. I think that's not healthy for a democracy, but it's just it's what it is, and if you want to change, you have to change the culture, and that's going to take a while.
And so, do you think that's also a problem, for example, in Bangladesh or in other parts of the world where culture is different?
I mean, it's obviously it's a problem everywhere. Like, I mean, am I going to say that in Bangladesh it's just different? Because here, I think in general, like even though again, I'm going to do a comparison here, because I think here we're definitely more educated, and I think that people, like people here, they do read the news more than in Bangladesh, where like a lot of people, they can't even read, right? And compared to that, like for example, and I think that in a way, like it just says a lot that when the way we react differently to news, right? Like people saying that the coronavirus is like in Bangladesh has been saying it's a Western virus, it's a rich people's virus. Like I remember my friend, he said he went to the villages and he talked to people. They're like, oh, what do you think about corona? He's like, corona, that's the rich people's virus, the people who live in the cities, right? Because those people, they're trying to live. They're like, what am I gonna do? Like, I can't. It's for them. It's basically the flu. Like, it doesn't matter. It's not to work. It's not to eat, right? So that's what I'm saying. Is that the way we react to what news is different. But in general, I think that here we're more educated, and sometimes it is to our detriment, because sometimes we overreact to news that because nothing, honestly, in Canada especially, nothing is happening. Okay, like it's our politics are boring in general. Our culture is like in like to the extent that there is a culture, it's in Quebec and like maybe to an extent in the Maritimes. In the West, I'm sorry, but like that's like it's basically America Light. In everywhere east from Ontario is America Light. Ontario is like this supposed to be this multicultural haven, but it's really a mess. So I mean, like, in the territories, obviously, like where the natives live, they have their own culture. But we're not gonna But in essence, nothing is happening really in Canada. So people like to find nitpick and find every little thing that's going on. But we're educated in general, so we whenever we see something, we read the news and we react. But in Bangladesh, it's the opposite. It's basically the educated people who are manipulating the people who are not, right. Like they're like, do you think all the hundreds of thousands of people who attend the political rallies, they have any idea what the politician is talking about? No, they don't. And this is an actual story my mom told me, that they have these trucks, right? The political parties have these trucks. They go in these, like the beggars. They go see in the villages. They tell these people, hey, you, I'm gonna give you $50, $50. Okay, I'm gonna give you like a lungi. It's like a thing you put around your waist, like it's a cloth. Okay, yeah, okay, $50 and that. Okay, come get on the truck. Okay, they load these people in the truck. They bring them to the rallies. They put them there. There's a conductor up front who tells them when to applaud, when to cheer. and they just sit there and they listen, and at the end they get their money and they leave. Okay, like that's that's just like just this is to show you that's like a general like how the dynamic is, right? Well, here we're more educated in general, but yeah, it's sometimes to our detriment, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, okay. Talking about election back in Bangladesh, Wikipedia described Bangladesh as a parliamentary representative democratic republic. How true is that?
I mean, in terms of like the system, that is true. Like it is a parliamentary representative democracy, but in terms of like in effect, like we've had uh, the same people running the country pretty much. Like in terms of it's been two people running the country since. Okay, so from 80 to 88 we had a military dictatorship basically, where it was Ershad who was running the country for a couple of years, and he was the president, and he installed himself and he was just there. But then there was a kind of revolution, and people they I mean, actually funny thing is he's still like in politics, like it's not like that's the thing in you'll find in South Asian countries. There's no shame, okay? Like you'll have these people who are like ousted for like they're like dictators, they're ousted, or they're corrupt, they're ousted, and they're still there. Like they don't disappear or anything. It's like there's no shame. Like it's like thievery is like such part of the culture that it's just seen as like whatever. People forget or they don't care. It's like whatever, and yeah, it wasn't so bad. But then there was a revolution, and since then it's been pretty much the same people running the country. Like we're not gonna pretend otherwise. And when people ask me, like, I'm kind of make a side point here. When people ask me why I don't like identity politics, like how in the U.S. Kamala Harris, oh my God, historical woman, first black woman of color, she's a vice president, it's historic. Look, in Bangladesh, we've had women like in terms of like actuality, like in terms of heads of states. Okay, prime minister has been a woman, leader of the opposition woman, speaker of the house woman for I don't know how many years. Sometimes they change roles, the prime minister and the leader of the opposition, like as elections come and go. But like in terms of actual policy, I'm sorry, but like in terms of women's equality, like is anyone going to say that Bangladesh is a haven for women's equality? Like, are you kidding me? It's let's not kid ourselves here. So I'm just saying that it matters more what policy. I'd rather have you know the whitest white guy running the country if the policies actually were like good policies, rather than having women run the country but the policies are there's not there and there's nothing changing in the long run. And who are the women in question? Funny thing, the speaker of the house, my mom went to law school with her. She's the daughter of this big like justice who was a justice in Bangladesh, right? Obviously, very powerful person. The current prime minister, she's the daughter of the first prime minister we had in 75, and the leader of the opposition, she's the wife of the second prime minister we had. So as you can see, the country runs pretty much on nepotism. So we're not gonna pretend that it's otherwise. And that when I talk about nepotism in general, that's how the whole country runs pretty much. Okay, a lot of people assume in the West that when I talk about class, right, like different classes, we talk about levels of wealth, but that is not the case in Bangladesh. How much money you have, it's often related to it is often correlated, but it's not true. Like you could be like if someone who's from the village, right, who comes from the lower classes of Bangladesh, who but who migrates here, makes a lot of money. If they go back to Bangladesh, stigma is always going to be there. Like from their accent, from the way they talk and everything, like and like from their name, you can guess that they're not from a very high class background, right? But what do I mean by class? I mean by education, right? Like my family is from like the upper class of Bangladesh, right? Like we like educated. My mom is obviously went to law school. She finished law school. She graduated as a lawyer. My grandfather, my grandmother, professor. teachers, uh, public servants, people who are from the educated class, right? Like they have degrees, they're very educated, they can read, they can write, like, and that's a big thing, being able to read and write in a country like that, right? So you don't come from like the lower classes, and that's obviously what the factor goes into, and you cannot get anything in Bangladesh if your name isn't there to back it up. Okay, like so many times, my mom, when she was working in for KLM, like the plane company. She was a cabin crew after she finished law school. She worked as a when I think it was I don't remember what she was when she was in law school, but she was working as a cabin crew in KLM, and she said that there was this guy who came back from Qatar after that. That's common, a lot of South Asian people want to go to work in like the Arab countries, and they make a lot of money. They come back, they bring the money back. This guy, and there's a trick in the airport where the security, when they when they go through the gates, right, and you put your stuff and they pass through security. Oftentimes the guards, they're like extremely corrupt, and they steal valuable luggage, like that happens. And oftentimes like they go inside the magnetic machine, and they don't come out on the other side. Okay, like I'm literally talking about it's that bad. Okay? And it's really blatant. Okay, but like the there's a huge like mafia running that stuff, so no one's gonna say anything, right? Hush hush. But yeah, so this guy works 2 years. Okay, like my mom knew him, like she talked to him in the plane, and everything. He worked 2 years for his family. He made a bunch of money. He came back, and his money got stolen in the gates, like when it was passing through the magnetic thing. Okay, and he panicked, and he went. And my mom, when she asked him like what was the matter, he told her what happened, and she immediately knew what happened. Like like if you know what goes on in the air, if you work in the airport, you definitely know what kind of fuckery goes on in the airports, right? So in the airport, when that happened, she went to see. She went upstairs. She brought the guy to the room upstairs where the army headquarters people were. And my uncle, he was a lieutenant colonel at the time. She went to see the army headquarters. She said, "Hey, I'm the private. I'm the niece. No, I'm sorry, not the niece, but like the sister in law of Lieutenant Colonel Mia Mushu Zaman, right?" And when he told her his name, that immediately the soldier was like, "Oh, yes, I know your brother-in-law, yes, blah 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 blah." And as I said, you have to use your name to get things through, right? If she didn't have the name, like he wouldn't do anything. Like honestly, he wouldn't do anything. But like she used his name and she explained the situation. They basically, like, that day they busted a huge ring of there was literally a house where there was like a bunch of valuable objects like being stored by like these mafia guys, right? And the army went in there, they busted that ring. The guy got his money back, and he thanked my mom and everything. So, but as I said, the fact that she had connections was huge, you know. And that's not the only situations. If you want to sue someone, right? If you're or even if something was done wrong against you, and you want to pursue charges against someone, there's literally a protocol, like, where the judge is not going to deliver a verdict until he's received all the bribes from the lawyers. Okay, like there's that's how it works, right? So like sometimes the lawyer is gonna go see like the judge's clerk, and he'll be like, the secretary is like, "Oh, is the judge ready for a verdict?" She's gonna say, "No, he's not ready for a verdict." That means the bribe hasn't arrived yet. Yeah, like there's a lot of code word stuff happening there, but that's what I'm talking about, right? You can literally get nothing done. And also, like, even if you want someone to like pursue, like, if someone commits a crime against you, like that happens. Like when I was there were some guys that uh obviously my mom, she was a woman. She had two sisters growing up in Bangladesh. Like, the culture there, like, she would tell me how, like, women would walk with their like bags holding like up to their chest, because guys would just come and grab their chest, okay, like from behind or whatever, okay. And yeah, it seems disgusting when you hear about it here. As I said, over there it's like, whatever. Like, I don't know, that was back when she was young. I don't know if it's changed now. I hope it did, honestly. But in a lot of ways, I think from what I hear, it's gotten worse. But I don't know. But anyway, she says that people would grab her chest. But anyway, growing up as a woman, and guys obviously did harass her and stuff like that. And oftentimes, like they would like be so blatant as to like try to commit a crime, right? Like one time she said that there was a guy who literally like and when you grow up in a country like that, you don't really have like PTSD isn't a thing really. Like here, I feel like oftentimes we really exaggerate PTSD. Like people are like, oh my god, someone touched me. Oh my god, I have PTSD. Like okay, like come on. And a lot. I'm sure I'm gonna get shit for this, but look, in Bangladesh, my mom, when she was younger, she was alone in the house with her two younger, no, actually her older and younger sister. There was a guy that like started cutting the door with like a saw, like sawing the door. Okay, literally, like she saw the saw coming in the door. She went to the window, opened the window. She screamed at her neighbor, shouted to her neighbors. They went and they caught the thief. And my mom's, I think it was her m- mother's sister's husband was the police chief at the time. Okay, that's the only reason that guy, got what he deserved at the end, because her mother's sister's husband was a police chief. Okay, like I'm like that just shows you how the country just runs on nepotism. Like that's just how it is. Okay, like even to this day, like we're not going to pretend otherwise. It the country runs like that. And yeah, I mean that's something you wouldn't see here. Like here we talk about like a lot of times like with the current we scandal going on with the Trudeau government, that oh my god, Trudeau's mother talked at the thing. Obviously I think that's bad, that like if Trudeau's mother, Margaret Trudeau, if she really did use her name to get paid speeches, that's bad. But that's because we have very high standards here. Like in Bangladesh, we have no standards. No standards, and the standard procedure is the country runs on nepotism.
Yeah, okay. So you talk about class during this conversation. What determines the class in Bangladesh? Is it knowledge, or is it a mix of knowledge and money?
Well, money. Less like generally with you, if you have the knowledge, you have the wealth. But like obviously that's not necessarily correlated. I'd say it's only about maybe half correlated. Like in terms of my mom, for example, she didn't grow up with a lot of money. Like a lot of times they struggle to pay the bills, like even for food. I'm talking about, not like rent and stuff. No, actually, they didn't have to pay rent because my grandmother, she worked as a professor, and she did tutoring. She was like a public servant. She was a government official, so she was able to live in the government complex housing, and she would live with other government officials, so they didn't have to on like the rent was like often very low, so that wasn't an issue. But the issue, like oftentimes like for food and stuff like that, as I said, my grandmother, she had to do tutoring to make money, and my mom, she was able to go to like a Christian private school, like in high school, because she did really well. She got like a scholarship, and even then, so my grandmother wouldn't pay more. She would ask her richer friends to like give her photocopies of their textbooks, because um she didn't want her mother to pay for textbooks. And she said that her friends, they all had drivers. They would come in like BMs and like fancy cars, and that's cool. And my mom said she didn't have any of that. Like she lived on very little when she was young. Like she said, like sugar, beef, that was like luxury. She said that we ate. She told me about. She said we ate oranges in Christmas. Like that was like a big thing. Like those things were so rare, and here we get that like so easily. And like we do. Oftentimes, I think that we're so spoiled that we just look for things to be entitled about, right? Like here, you can just go to the supermarket and buy something for like so cheap, like oranges or whatever, like sugar and beef. There, it's not that expensive. Okay, depends what kind of beef, but like, come on, like normal beef, you can buy that for like $15 at the supermarket. Like we're not gonna pretend that it's inaccessible for someone even who's lower middle class. And if you're hungry, if you don't have money to buy food banks, like, oh my god, I did a lot of community organization, like I worked in a lot of community organizations. I go in these food banks, and people get mad at me for saying that, but come on, like the food that the people from the food that people eat from the food bank, they eat better than I do. Okay, like I went in these food banks. Okay, like when I was in the community organization, sometimes because I didn't have time to bring my lunch, I'd eat the food that we had there because we worked there. We were allowed to eat there. And honestly, I oftentimes with the food that was there, I would eat better than I eat at home. Okay, and the class system, as you were saying, is it based on wealth or education? It's a mix of both, but it's also like geographical location. Like if you come from like a village, right, compared to the city, even if you're like poor, like relatively poor, if you're able to live in the city, like not as a beggar, but like as like someone who's like able to afford to live in the city, even if you're like struggling more, like if you're in the village, oftentimes even if you can eat, you can eat at like the food you grow on your land, you have more land and stuff, but based on your accent, on your level of education, which is often like on villages, you don't have that much education. You don't have, obviously you don't even have a high school education oftentimes, and like literacy is like pretty basic to the extent that it is. Like oftentimes you can write your name and that's about it. So like that shows, and oftentimes, as I said, class is based on that, not on how much money you have. And if you live in the city, generally, yeah, you do have. If you live in a reasonable neighborhood like the DOHS or whatever, you have money, like in general, because you're able to get these jobs that require education. Like, why do you think it's such a big deal to get a university degree here? Because those education related jobs, like they're higher paying, right? So it's correlated to a certain extent. But in Bangladesh, the class system, also, when we talk about servants, right? Like the idea of having a servant, like here you're like, oh, like it's like you people often they mix up like the word, they like, oh, like slaves, like talk about like slavery, and having someone, if someone saw how servants are treated in Bangladesh, they would say slavery. The proper term would be indentured servitude, because they're tied to they're bound, their house, they're land bound, they're bound to the house for the extent of their employment. But servants, oftentimes they're treated like literally like it's a different class. Like they're, and when I'm talking about different class, I'm not talking about like here you're like, oh my god, the poorer classes are treated so differently. There's a distinction. No, I'm saying like they can literally not eat at the same table as the masters, as the people who like run the house. They cannot sleep in the same rooms. They have to sleep on the floor. They don't get a bed. They get different living quarters. They have like primitive bathrooms, like older model bathrooms, while the people who like the masters, they get the good bathrooms, basically.
Flushing toilets.
Yeah, like yeah, like actual toilets, yeah. And look, I never like lived for like more than 6 months in a row in Bangladesh, but for all the times I went there, like I saw that, okay, like the way that they're treated, and you're gonna say that those servants, they're often beaten, they're raped, and for the girls who work there, younger girls even, like it's, and that's the life, and but they come from the villages to work in the city because they can make money, right? And often, a lot of times they don't even make it. Like they get like, a lot of times they come like via people who then sell them to prostitution, right? Like to these like brothels. And Vice did a really good segment on this, where they went to these like brothels run in Bangladesh, and it's messed up, like the stuff. And actually, my mom told me a story that even when she was a lawyer, she almost got sold into prostitution one time, because after she became a lawyer, she didn't work for this like big firm. She worked for an NGO. Like she was very like community minded, right? She went to work for the community. She worked for this NGO. They sent her and her partner, who was a guy, over to a village. They were supposed to meet at this point, but she went on a rickshaw, which is like these three-wheeled like vehicles, like these three-wheeled bike vehicles that you can ride in the back. But what she didn't know is the guy, the rickshaw, the guy who drove the rickshaw, he was getting paid by the people who run the brothels to bring them, workers, right? And but that's a very common mode of transportation. You wouldn't assume that by like getting on a rickshaw. Like people use rickshaws all the time. So she got on. He brought her. He was supposed to stop at like the spot, but he brought her into a weird place, and it was starting to get dark or whatever. And asked him like, where are you? You bringing me? And he wouldn't answer. And he basically, he dropped her off at like, and he got down. And he started talking to this a madam, basically. A madam is a woman who runs the brothel, right? And he started talking to her and like getting the payment. And my mom knew what was going on. She was gonna like, as I said, but she was trying to stay calm because like she had to get out of there. So what she did, she got down and she just ran. She ran away, and eventually she got lucky because the guy who was supposed to meet her, he found her, right? And he's like, Rocky, you're there. Like we've been looking for you all day and stuff. And he got scared, and she told him what happened. And he's like, oh my god. And but she said that but in any, if you almost got sold into prostitution in Canada, that would be like a traumatic experience, right? No, my mom, she got up the next day and she went to work. It's like it's life. Like you just assume that these things can happen over there, and you just live on. It is what it is.
Well, like talking about your experiences and the expectation of the people in Bangladesh have towards their life, what do you think of the let's say rising ethical concerns, for example, of sweatshops? People here are very concerned about that in Bangladesh and China, for example. So do you think our rising concern for the, let's say, well-being of the citizens of your country, for example, is actually hurting them because they don't have this same expectation and they're actually earning wages that they can live off of in sweatshops?
I don't think it's like in any country, like in Bangladesh, especially like sweatshops is like like the conditions there are like abhorrent, like they're pretty disastrous. Obviously, there are some like textile factories that are better than others. Like obviously, I didn't go into the like when I saw textile factories, I didn't go into the ones that hire child laborers. Obviously, they're not gonna let you see that stuff, especially if they know you're Canadian or anything like that. They're gonna be like, because people know, like when you go to Bangladesh, if they know you're Canadian, you're seen as like a higher class above. Even if you come from a good family and you immigrate and you're a Canadian and you have like a nationality, they're gonna see you as a higher class. I'm gonna talk about this a bit later, but about the textile factories, right? The sweatshops, the conditions are bad there, but I think that like there's potential for things to get better, right? If the country gets wealthier in the long run, I think that the individual wealth of people is going to increase, and that the concentration of wealth, like even if it stays in the upper classes because of cultural reasons, eventually like you're gonna see people in the lower classes get maybe wealthier as well, because there's with the diversification of the economy, right? Because before in Bangladesh you had like textile and that's about it, right? And the limited exports that you had from those, which is a lot. Like I'm sure that if you check any of your clothes, like there's a lot of made in Bangladesh stuff there, right? And because it's cheap. But I think that there's like a lot of emerging industries there, like pharmaceutical industry is emerging in Bangladesh, and as the economy diversifies and there's different like industries, you're going to see the country get wealthier. And I think that there's potential for like individual entrepreneurs to succeed in despite the government being as corrupt as it is, right, in general. And even if the politicians they take a lot of bribes, I think that there's a potential for the country to succeed if like individuals they take advantage of the big potential that the country has, right? Obviously it's going to be hard. Like you're from China, right?
Yeah, I'm from China.
You know that like for many years the country had to endure hardship, right? Like it wasn't easy, like especially after the cultural revolution and under Deng Xiaoping, like it was like the years were hard, but eventually things started getting better as the generations went by, because it was hard for one generation, but then the next one got more wealth and so on. And I think that there's potential for like no and as I said, China is like it's not a democracy; it's an authoritarian system of government. So in Bangladesh, even if it's not a proper democracy and there's a lot of corruption, I think that there's definitely potential for like individual entrepreneurs to do well. And I think the best example of that is um, the guy who started Grameen Bank, Muhammad Yunus. You know, he invented this, and he's a Nobel Prize winner, by the way. He invented micro financing. So these banks give like small loans, and they have a 97% rate of return for very low interest. They give this like loans worth $100 in like US dollars. In Bangladesh, it's a lot, obviously, but they give like these small loans to people to start their own businesses. And obviously, if you don't pay back your loans, like they send their goons and they beat you up and they, right? But I mean, I'm not gonna pretend otherwise. But in it's not all like roses and sunshine. But in terms of like the amount of good that has done, I think that definitely that outweighs the bad. And the extent of the entrepreneurship is going in the long run is going to be better for the country. I just think it's a matter of time, but obviously in that time, it's going to be hard. Okay, like people are going to suffer. A lot of people are going to die. Like we saw in Dhaka, the huge fire that happened because of the lack of regulations in the textile industry. A factory caught fire and 1,200 people died. That doesn't keep happening. Okay, like, and that's bad. But I mean that obviously that's because there's basically like the government is busy doing being corrupt, so you can't do anything about that. But the in terms of like the industry itself, I think that for individuals there's definitely a huge land of opportunity, and I think that companies too, they see it that if they can go there and if there's any Marxists listening to this, they're going to say exploit the workers. And yeah, they're going to exploit the workers. But in the long run, I think that for individual workers in Bangladesh, there's an opportunity for them to make their lives better. And but it's going to be hard and long, and no one says it's going to be easy. But I think that it's going to the country is going to get better in the long run. I do believe that.
Okay. That's great to hear. Actually, I saw some statistics on the GDP per capita in Bangladesh. I think it's rising at a pretty constant rate with its real GDP, showing the same trend basically. So I think what you said has grounds and support. I want to come back on you said like you're an higher class. People see you as a higher class in Bangladesh because you're an immigrant and you're educated and you're a Canadian citizen. So how does that work?
Well, I'm Canadian, right? I'm Canadian citizen. Oh yeah, I would talk about that, right? Thanks for bringing that up. So I'm a Canadian citizen, right? That means a lot because a lot of people in Bangladesh, obviously, I think that the country is going on a better path, but it's still bad. So people want to get out, right? Like they want to find every way they can through like any method they can to get out and come to Canada, United States, Europe. They want to get out, okay? That's the bottom line. How do you get out? There's many ways to get out, but like through family, through immigration, which takes long. Family, obviously, it's less long, but you still need visa and all of that. It's like right now we're actually working to try to get some of our family over here, and we're struggling, okay? Like we're Canadian citizens, okay? Just to give you an idea about how hard it is. Like people who say that, oh, Canada, here immigration. Canada's immigration is one of the strictest in the world. Okay, like we have pretty strict immigration guidelines. It's not easy to get people here, for people to come here. You need like, my mom was able to come here because she was educated. As I said, like they need people, and she learned French in Quebec, and she had to learn French, and now she's doing well because she got accepted and she got her visa. But it's hard for people from Bangladesh, and if you want to come as an investor, it's expensive. Like it's ridiculous. Okay, like you need to pay a ridiculous amount of money to come. So, but one of the tricks that they do, why it's important in Bangladesh, actually, this happened to me and a lot of other guys. You have these people in these families, they're like, oh, marry my daughter. Marry my daughter, okay? They're like, oh, I did the best I could in Bangladesh as a parent, but here I have my daughter here who's like 16. I want her to have a better life in Canada. Marry her, and bring her and sponsor her to bring her to Canada, right? That's a big scheme actually, and that was a big scheme, and the Canadian immigration system had to close a lot of loopholes, this marriage loophole, because what they would do is they would marry. That was big, and I remember because I grew up with a lot of Pakistani and Indian people, right, and Bengali people too, and um, they would go back to their country. They would obviously they grew up here, like like kids. They would grow up here. They would be like whatever 15, 16, 17, 18, right? And they did like reach the age where you can legally marry in Canada, right? Like which is 16 with your parents' consent. They would go back to their country. They'd these someone in like maybe someone would give them money, or it'd be like someone in their family. They would marry their cousin or their sister or whatever. They would bring them here. They would show on paper that they're living together for like the amount of time required, which is I think was 3 years at the time. Then they would divorce. They would go back in their country and repeat the whole thing all over again. And that way they would bring basically their entire family over here. Like it's a thing. Like it really is. Like even when I went back, like like obviously it was interesting. Like oh you're obviously like what they assume is like okay you're Canadian, so you have money. Okay, like if you live in Canada, you have money. You are you're Bengali, like your origins are from here. You speak language and everything, and your family is from there, and you're from this educated class, right? It's a big deal. So they're like, oh, you're very like, proper guy and everything, and you know what? I wouldn't mind my daughter marrying you, and that's not like they would want me to like marry them like for like and have kids and stuff, like they like because it's like if you marry someone in a class above than you, then those kids have a chance of exceeding to like the higher class, right? And you know what? Those kids when they come, if you marry and you sponsor and they come in, those kids they're gonna be Canadian. They're gonna be born Canadian, right? Because birthright citizenship. So that's the whole trick, right? But I think that there's also a problem is that they want all the advantages of the Canadian citizenship, but they don't want to give up anything like about the bank, like in terms of culture. They don't want to integrate in the culture here, so they go and they live in like Park Extension, where all the other, or like if in Toronto, you live like in Mississauga, or like in Brampton, where Brampton is called Browntown because that's where all the South Asians live. But they go live with their own diasporas, and they don't like in Quebec they don't learn French. Like obviously I went to French school. I mean they don't mix with like other cultures. They just stay with their own culture. So honestly, I honestly ask the question: what's the point of doing all this, coming here and just staying with your people? Like I honestly wonder, like what's the point? Because you came here to have a better life, and obviously your country is a mess because of a lot of things that you're replicating over here. Like that's a very common thing that I like to talk about, is that you're like a lot of reasons that countries are a disaster. Like we talk about colonialism, but like at some point you need to come to terms is that it's not just imperialism and colonialism. Like to some extent, the people in that country have to take responsibility and do better for themselves. Like China was a victim of colonialism, like the 100 years of humiliation, the century of humiliation. That was a thing. Like China got like messed up by several European countries, okay, like at once, and yet now it's like the second economy in the world, and like it's like a rising superpower, okay. Like China proved that you can like arise above whatever happened before in your history. And I think at some point, those like a lot of countries that are saying that, oh, it's because of like I keep blaming imperialism and keep taking foreign aid. At some point, they have to come to terms with that. You need the people in that country and the governments. They need to, come to terms that they have a role and responsibility to their citizens and to each other in their country and to do better. And I think that's a cultural thing, right? That if you're willing to to rise above that. And I think that in a lot of times, like in Bangladesh, like they come here and they repeat the same stuff. Like I remember I went to Toronto with my father a couple of years ago, and it was funny because obviously I grew up here, so there's a cultural gap between me and people in Bangladesh, right? And there was a guy who owed money to my father, and apparently that guy owed money to a lot of people too. Like he basically stole money. Like there's a thing that if you want to bring money from Bangladesh, you do it through brokers, and that guy was a broker, and he basically didn't give the money. Like he didn't give the money. So you know what he said, that my dad was talking with the other guys, and they were basically saying that they were planning. They were like, yeah, we're gonna go to his guy and beat the shit out of him. To this guy's house and beat the shit out of him. Okay, that's a very Bangladesh thing to do. Okay, but that's not in Bangladesh. That's here in Toronto. Okay, that they were gonna do that. And also this whole stuff about like thieving and stealing and like talking behind people's back, and like all this little stuff even that seemed like so banal. That's like a very like a cultural thing that I think that is like detrimental to bring over here. But that's what happens when you stay with your own people all the time, and you don't mix, and you don't like go to like outside of your own diaspora, and you don't like explore. You think that that's all there is. You think that's the only way to live. That the only way to like move forward in life is with your family's name. The only way to like do better in life is by like stabbing people in the back and like trying to like one up each other and talking behind people's back. And you think there's no honest and like no way with integrity to do things. And like I think that's harmful. And that can only happen. That situation can only happen if you stay with your own culture. Like if you're like me and you didn't live with the diaspora, like I didn't grow up in Park Extension. I never lived in Park Extension at any time of my life, or in any of those like extremely demographically homogenous places where there's only brown people that live. And that's why I got to mix with other cultures, and I got to learn and get like a diverse idea, and I got to make a judgment for myself that what I think is better and what I think is not, right? And that's why I'm able to come here and say all of this. If I grew up in the diaspora, I'd be like, oh no, like this is normal. It's how life is. Like and I think a lot of people in Bangladesh also, especially like less educated people, have this like tendency like to say that to use Allah as an excuse, right? Because obviously Bangladesh is a Muslim country, and say that things are the way they are because Allah wanted it to be that way. It's God's work. It's not anyone's fault. It's God's work, right? And oftentimes because of that, you don't realize that you're getting screwed by someone who's like a different class than you, or someone in government who's like the elites, right? You're not gonna blame the elites of the country if you think it's God who did it, who wanted it this way, right? That's all. I want to say about that.
Well, you brought on the point of people living together. Do you think that's only a socioeconomic issue where they don't have enough money to move outside of their communities, or do you think like they just want to live in their communities? And I know here we have like this whole thing going on about like, it's our housing practices that's keeping all those black or brown people together. That's why they're living together in a poor condition. But according to your point of view is no, they want to live together instead of it's us putting them there. So to which extent do you think the housing market is contributing to the creation of these group communities, or and to which extent the communities themselves are contributing to building those communities?
Yeah, I mean that's a very loaded question, but I think that in general, if you're like I think it's very easy to explain. As I said, like if you're, it's not, it wouldn't be that hard to solve, but like obviously it takes a change. But like if you're from another country, right, and you're coming to a country that you don't know, obviously you're gonna tend to live with people that you do know, right? That you can relate to. That's pretty normal, right? Because even when the first time she came, like she lived in one of those like pretty like poor, more crime ridden neighborhoods that her uncle at the time, he was Canadian, and he brought her and he like got her to like sign a lease in this neighborhood, and he's like, oh yeah, here and because when you're from another country, from Bangladesh, you assume that Canada is like better, okay, like by default, like everything is better. Like you think that there's no crime, police is not gonna do anything. Like you think that that everything is just better here. So you don't assume that a lot of the things that happen in Bangladesh are gonna happen here. But no, when my mom moved into that bad neighborhood, like she had money stolen, she had her house broken in, like her apartment, people broke in her apartment, like that happened. Like her door bashed in, the like that, and her own landlord was a scum. Like that was a thing. Like obviously anyone who lives here knows that happens, and that happens in literally every country. But that's because like that the neighborhood was just bad. Like obviously once you move to a better neighborhood, that stopped happening. Okay, like but I think that in general, as I said, but people they just live with people that they know, and they assume that's the best they can get, and they stay with other people, and all the time it's not even like for lack of money. Like I think that there are ways like to make a lot of money. Like a lot of these people, they work in manufacturing, and obviously in manufacturing you do pretty well. You make like $25 an hour, 20, 25, and that's a good salary, right? You can definitely make a living and like even rent an apartment in a better neighborhood if you obviously it's very hard work, right? Like I remember when I worked at McDonald's, like I went to work at like seven in the morning, and or like when I finished my night shift, there were like in the bus or whatever, I saw people who were going to work at like 6 a.m. in a factory. Okay, like it's hard work, but you definitely get your money's worth. And I think though it's not because you can't move to a better neighborhood. It's just because you don't want to move to a better neighborhood. Like in Chinatown, why do so many Chinese people live in Chinatown with other Chinese people, right? Because it's hard to get out of your comfort zone. Like you live with people from your country that common culture. It's a logical thing to do. It just is. And to say otherwise is like fooling yourself, right? You like my mom, obviously she curbed the trend. She didn't want to live with people from her country because she saw like a lot of ways she was disgusted with like the culture, right? In a lot of elements of the culture, like the lying, and also the very anti-women nature of the culture. Like my mom, she was in the women's rights movement in Bangladesh, and like the obviously the religious establishment, the imams, they didn't like that. Like they would like at every turn, the religious establishment would try to undermine and even like go as far as killing people in the women's rights movement. And they were like and a lot of it's not even ordering. It's just that if you're like a radicalized, like if you're a radicalized Muslim and you think that women shouldn't have rights, you see this woman asking for rights, you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna stone you to death, like that. That's like it happens in a lot of Muslim countries. Like it does. Like it's just because of the dogma and the doctrine and the indoctrination that happened over time, and that needs to change, obviously. But when my mom, she came here, she was disgusted. She didn't want to live with people from her country. So when the first chance she got, she moved to a more diverse neighborhood, right? So yeah, I mean, I've lived in the same neighborhood my entire life, pretty much with mostly with Arab, like Lebanese and Armenian people in this neighborhood. It's pretty good, It's in general. I'm not gonna. I like it, at least. Maybe because I grew up with these people, so maybe I'm also in a way uh guilty of the same thing, right? Like I grew up with these people, so I'm very relatable. I can relate, and I'm comfortable living with these people because I grew up with them, right? So you can understand how someone in Bangladesh who stayed with Bengalis and other brown people their entire life, they would want to stay with their own kin, right?
Well, I definitely see that even like in Mary, right? In Marianopolis, we see a lot of Chinese students, international Chinese students. They don't tend to mix with other students. Like I'm the exception. I don't use WeChat. That's a big thing for a Chinese, right? Um,
We're like two sides of the same coin, honestly. You're like the like the Chinese version of me. Like I don't live with my own kin either. Like I don't live with other brown people. I don't even mix that much with other brown people. Like honestly, the first time, like I went to an Arab high school, like a lot of Arabic people, like Lebanese, Egyptians. They were like the brown people in my school was like me and my sister. That's it. Okay, like so I didn't, and the first time that I saw like, a significant population of brown people at school was Marianopolis. Like the all the Desi people in Marianopolis were like this and that. Like I've never spoken Bengali with anyone else than my mom for like years. Okay, like just my mom and my family, and same thing for like Hindi or Urdu. Like I haven't spoken those like with anyone outside like for a long time. And when I come to Marianopolis, suddenly there's like this huge like community of like Desi people, and for me it's like whoa, you know.
Yeah, I get that. Definitely get that. So you said a lot of you talked about a lot of social problems and cultural problems in Bangladesh. As like your family is from Bangladesh, do you feel any cultural attachment to your country?
Of course I do. Of course I do. I'm only first. Sorry, I'm only what kind of first generation? But yeah, I mean like my mom is from there. She immigrated here, and I'm born here, right? So I'm basically first generation, and well, actually, my mom would be first generation. Some like second generation, but you know, generally they say it takes several. Like I think it takes they say at least the third generation to start, you know, losing cultural attachment. But that doesn't happen, as I said, if you live with your own community, right? That takes a lot longer, and sometimes it never happens. It can persist for generations to generation if you live with your own community. But if you live outside, if you live like with other like in like Quebec at large, then you're definitely eventually going to be assimilated, right? Like that's how it works. Like in no matter which country you go, Germany, in Europe, France, or the US, eventually you're going to get assimilated if you live. Obviously, you're gonna have some elements of your like your lineage, right? But eventually, all the Scottish people, the Irish people, all the people who immigrated in the U.S. and Canada, who were from like Britain and stuff, they were assimilated into the culture here, right? Over time, it took a long time. Same thing for the Polish and the Italians and etc. etc. But it takes several generations. And me, I'm obviously I have a huge cultural attachment. Like I speak with my family who live in Bangladesh, okay, and I go back to the country once every a few years or so. So, and I still speak my language, like my mother tongue. I can read and write, and I can speak the language, right? So, obviously, I have a huge cultural, you know, attachment, but not to that much, to the extent that you know my mom has, but definitely a huge cultural attachment, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel the same thing. Basically, I moved here. I'm not even born here, so definitely feel it. But do you feel like some of your cultural heritage is creating you problems? For example, like all your things you've said, like stealing or maybe like speaking behind someone's back. Do you feel like sometimes those cultural influences also have an effect on you?
I mean, I don't live with. As I said, I don't live with other Desi people like in the community, so I don't really get to experience the effects of like of that culture to the extent that it still exists over here. Because obviously over here we have laws, like you know you can't. But again, if you the stronger laws you have, the more people find ways to go around them. But like me personally, the way I don't do those things, like obviously because I have way like the way that I said that you know they're like, oh, how do you like just like how do I get beyond like that culture? I just don't do that, you know, like I don't have a habit of stealing or like talking behind people's backs because I just don't do that. I learned that that's not a good thing to do and that's not the right thing to do, so I don't do it. It's obviously hard to get rid of it if you constantly live with people who do that all the time. You'll be inclined to do it as well. But if you don't, then you don't. Like obviously, there's other things that obviously I've acquired other aspects that you know of culture, but that part I don't have that baggage because I've never experienced it or done that, right?
Yeah. I think some final questions. Wait, I had a question on my mind. Well, I guess I lost it. Oh yeah. The question was, in the first episode of the podcast, I was talking with Professor Chu. She's one of our coordinators of the certificate. And she was talking about, I think, Latino supporters supporting Trump. And then basically the Latino speaker was saying, we don't want any more of Latinos coming over here. Do you think that's sort of like what you're experiencing, but more on a higher level?
Oh, I know something about this actually. I think this is a very interesting phenomenon. Is that we all the time when we talk about racism, right? Like in general in the West, it's white against people of color, right? It's like it's white privilege, white racism, white supremacy. It's like the systemic racism, right? But what like I think a lot of white people like in general miss is that like even like you're from China, I'm from Bangladesh, people in my country are way more racist than white people. Okay, like to the extent that like the racism is much worse. Like not against, and funny thing is like not against white people. Like white people, we kind of worship white people in the Indian subcontinent in general. We kind of see white people as like higher level, and there's even this product called Fair and Handsome or Fair and Lovely where they that's like a huge advertisement thing. It's called a fairness cream. You put the cream to make your skin lighter on your, you know. And
like Michael Jackson.
Huh?
Like Michael Jackson.
No, Michael Jackson got plastic surgery, but no, I'm saying that you're still brown, but you make your skin like lighter by putting this fairness cream. And I always find that really funny because here in North America and in Canada, I'm like, my skin, I can use my skin color. Like, I don't like to talk about my skin color because I don't really care, but like I can use the fact that I'm brown can get me a lot of things. Like every time when they ask me the question, like, are you a visible minority? That's what I'm saying, is that here it's like a huge quote unquote advantage for me. Like, if I wanna get like a lot of these things, like, oh, we're doing this for minorities only, I'm like, hey, I'm a minority, but in the Indian subcontinent, having lighter skin is seen as more beautiful. Like the Bengali word shundor, we use shundor, it means like beautiful or like nice, good looking. It can be used interchangeably with lighter skin. Okay, and oftentimes you'll hear someone say, "This person looks good for a darker skinned person, like a black person." It's like when you said that, oh yeah, that she's pretty. Like, yeah, she's pretty for a darker skinned person. Like that's a common thing. And how recently there's like a huge deal about the N word here in Quebec. Right? I'm sorry, but like in Bangladesh, people still talk about black people. Like they still use the word Negro as like a acceptable term to talk about black people. Okay, like about darker skinned people. So if you want to talk about like racism, I'm sorry, but like the extent, like the way that we treat racism here is that when someone is racist, people is like, dude, like, no, like that's not right, like this is wrong, and there's like reactions of like outrage in general. Okay, in Bangladesh, when people say, like, when you use the terms like Negro, talk about the black people, they're like, they don't say anything. Like, yeah, like they disagree. Like, they're like, it's a normal term to use. And same thing for, like, as I said, like being whiter is seen as like more as like better. You're like, oh, like even in these ads of like Fair and Lovely, they show that, oh, if you have lighter skin, oh, all the girls are gonna want you. And like it literally show that this guy is like training in the gym, and and then he goes outside, like, but he has like darker skin, and the girls, they don't want him. They're like, they leave, and he can't get a job and stuff. Then he uses the product, and he has lighter skin, and now suddenly he can get the girl, he can get the job, and the sad thing is, it's kind of not wrong. It's kind of true. Like North Indians especially, and like they're really obsessed with having lighter skin. If you look at these Bollywood actors, a lot of them are just white. Okay, like they're just white, and it's not surprising because like with all the years of like colonialism that happened, like even me, I probably have white ancestry in my lineage. Like I wouldn't be surprised if I had white ancestry. So yeah, it's really incredible how like we see racism, and same thing like you can probably attest to that. But like myself, when I came to Marianopolis, like like Chinese people using terms like lawai or guilo, like that's like I've heard that and it's a lot of worse terms too, like so like we know that racism in our like culture is very much ingrained,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's sort of like here we talk about always white racism, right? But in it just made me realize this. Like in our own communities, we use a lot of terms to group different people together. For example, we use 老外 to just refer to white people in general. We don't care about whether they're a European or Canadian or American. That's just a general term we use. Sort of like back in the days when French or American people, they just refer to Chinese as everyone Asian, right? So like our first generation immigrants, but more specifically those that have more adapted more to like a Western lifestyle. Do you think we have like a pushback against our own culture or community, or have like this weird mix of attachment and also to both like the Western culture and our home culture?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. Like to come back to your question earlier. That actually, I'm sorry, I forgot to answer that part because I got lost in my idea. Is that yeah, I think that to some extent that I think that like you don't want like I don't be personally like I'm not necessarily like in favor of like more people from Bangladesh coming over here. Like obviously I want my family to come here, but I don't want like even me like to some extent like we're also guilty. Like I don't want people from like lower classes, like less educated classes to like come over here, because I think that they're not their culture especially is not compatible with the one that we try to promote in Canada. Obviously, their children maybe they have a chance, but like they're gonna have a huge like gap with their parents, and that's like in terms of that's why in general I'm not in favor of like mass immigration from like random parts of the world. Like obviously I'm in favor of like educated immigrants coming here and like giving contributing with a brain gain to the country, but in terms of like just any like open the borders, let anyone anywhere come in, that's not something I think that's advisable in my opinion. Hmm. Well, there's a legal process, right? For example, like like I study law, like I look at this stuff. The third safe country agreement, right? Like the fact that if you leave your country, the country you enter in, if it's like it's part of this agreement, that's like if it's one of those countries like like if you live in Mexico, if you live in Haiti and you come to the US is considered a safe country. You have to apply for immigration over there, right? You can't then go on to Canada and apply for immigration in Canada, right? There's this agreement. You can agree with it or not agree with it. A politician can say that I don't like this, but that doesn't mean that it's not there, right? If this agreement says that if you leave your country and the first country you enter is part of this agreement and you have to apply for immigration there, and you don't apply there and you go and you apply to Canada, you can get deported. Okay, like that's like I'm sorry, it's the law. And and saying that it sounds cold and all, you're not you don't have empathy for them. It's not about having empathy, okay? Like a lot of times I think people get lost with this immigration talk in talk and empathy. That's that's a side point, okay? That's not the point. Like I'm not gonna say that oh I want this to happen because I don't have empathy for them. Anyone who leaves their country obviously left for a reason, and I have a lot of empathy for them because as I said, my mom also left the country for the same reason. But my mom, she didn't run over the border and come to Canada as a stowaway, and then came here and then just stayed here as an illegal immigrant or anything. She came here with a visa. She applied for citizenship after going through the appropriate procedure, after the time and everything required, right? If you come here as a refugee, if you say, okay, I'm a refugee, I apply on humanitarian grounds, I apply on political asylum grounds, or any grounds, whatever. If your claim gets rejected, you're gonna get deported. Like it's hard, but a country with borders needs to have laws to protect those borders. Otherwise, anyone can run across. Okay. Obviously, you're not gonna be ridiculous now and say we're gonna build a wall on the Canadian border. Okay, like that's not a rational, reasonable thing to do, because most of but like I obviously agree that we should close the Roxham Road, for example. Like we've been talking so long about the Roxham Road, that the road that these people keep coming through, and these illegal immigrants, the migrants, they keep running through, and we had to set up a shelter in the Olympic Stadium to house like 1,000 refugees. I'm like, that situation shouldn't have happened in the first place, right? If you're and I think that to an extent, like Trump, when he talks about, he said that obviously his wall is stupid, but like it's expensive and it's stupid, and it's like, what's the point? But when he says that if you're an immigrant, there's a door, and like you need to wait in line where the others, you can't just run across the border and apply for immigration. I think you can if you're a refugee. If you say that, my life is in danger where I come from, okay, like my country, my life is in danger, and if I don't come here and apply for this like refugee status and on humanitarian grounds, I'm gonna get killed, okay? But don't expect that if you like come across the border and you have no valid, proper reason, no evidence to show that you have a good reason to come and over here, then you're gonna get deported. Like that's the truth. Like there's immigration laws, and there's visas for a reason and all that. Like why should you basically get the privilege of getting your name put on top of the list while someone has been waiting for years to get even a visa?
Yeah, there's definitely this question of fairness about legal immigrants and illegal immigrants. Like, legal immigrants have to go through this long process of waiting. Like, I think our family waited like around 4 years. So there's definitely this question of fairness. Legal immigrants are not going to be happy that this illegal...
Not just money, it's paperwork. It's a huge pile of paperwork.
Yeah, exactly.
Like right now we're trying to get my family over, like some people in family over here. We had to we had to hire lawyers, we had to draft pages and pages and documents paperwork, send this to immigration, send that to immigration, send that to the embassy over there, send that to the consulate. It's it's a pile of paperwork, and it's expensive.
So there's this question of fairness and also this question of law. But also during the first interview with Professor Chu, she said law is not justice, and law is often behind the times that we are currently in. So how true do you think that is in this context?
I think no. I mean, she's right. Like law is not what is just in your eyes is not necessarily the law. Like if you think that, as I said, people say that I'm not being empathetic with immigrants. For them, it's not just that these immigrants can't just run across the border and apply for immigration and have the fact that we don't have open borders basically is not justice for them. Like we should have open borders. That's like the right thing to do. That's like the John Lennon imagine no countries, right? Imagine no borders and whatever. But in the end, the courts they cannot exercise what I call vigilante justice, right? A judge cannot be an activist judge and say that, because I think that the law isn't right, I'm going to legislate from the bench. That's up to the politicians to do. If the politicians they vote tomorrow and they're like, you know what, Canada has no immigration laws from this day on, our borders are open. If the politicians vote for that, you may like that, you may not like that, but that's going to become the law of the land. But a judge legislating from the bench is a very dangerous precedent. And I don't know what Professor Chu said, and I didn't watch her interview on her podcast, on your podcast, but like if she was trying to say that I'm not gonna I'm not gonna assume that she said that, but if what the argument she was trying to make is that the judges should legislate from the bench and use vigilante justice to apply to basically let to use empathy to have empathy override the law itself, that's a very dangerous precedent because a judge could use that for anything, and even things that I'm sure Professor Chu would find very morally objectionable. A judge could say, oh, you know what, I'm pro life. I'm gonna say that every abortion clinic that performs abortion is committing murder. Well, okay, like you legislated from the bench. You just created a law out of thin air as a judge. And this is, as I said, the minute you start legislating from the bench and you say that judges can legislate from the bench, you're setting a precedent that it's like Pandora's box. You can put the everything back in the box. Okay, it's going to be a disaster. And like this is why a country like a democracy is run by a certain set of laws, and we need those laws to be respected whether we like them or not. Like there are a lot of laws that I may not like, but I have to live with them. Obviously, I think you can do a lot of things to change those laws. You can lobby, you can vote, you can run for office, you can call your politicians and say that, oh, this thing that really matters for me, and I want you to propose this bill and table this motion. But you cannot ask judges whose role are to interpret the law, and we have to always remember that, to rule on immigration cases. And like, look, we have to go in front of judges, and a lot of time, it sucks like to hear that, oh, your immigration case has been denied. Like I did, when you do interpretation at the court, or when my mom did interpretation at the court, like so many cases, like, oh, the judge said, oh, your immigration case is denied, or your this is denied. Oh, like, you're like, oh, it's not right, it's not fair. Like, this woman, she went through all this stuff, right? But a judge has to interpret the law. A judge has to look at what the law says and say that, look, your criteria, like, you don't meet the criteria to become a legal immigrant of this country, and I cannot let you in. The judge may say it's wrong, but the judge has to do their job. And if they don't do their job, and that's why there's an appeal system, right? If they don't do their job, it's going to go to another court, and the court is going to overturn that call, right? It's how it is. Like, we need laws, the rule of law. Like, there are things that in place, divisions of power, things in place that exist here, not just to like, and you can say that it's to, and it benefits the status quo. It maintains the powers that be. And Professor Chu is right when he says the laws are often behind their times. But again, it's not the job of judges to legislate from the bench. If you think that the laws are behind their time, you cannot ask judges to be quote unquote progressive and say that, oh, you have to legislate from the bench to bring the laws where they're supposed to be, right? If you think the laws are behind the time, like, I don't know, like, maybe Miss Chu should run for office, like maybe she should be the one to change the laws. Like, I don't know, like I'm just a random loudmouth talking here, right? Like, if I think that there are laws that are unjust, like, I definitely talk about them, but I'm not gonna ask any judge ever to rule in a way that is not written in the law, because I know that it's gonna come back to bite me, and I don't want that. Yeah, I'm just saying the implication, but like, yeah, but I mean, she's right. The law doesn't equal justice, but as I said, justice, when it comes from, like, if you put justice above the law as a judge, that becomes vigilante justice, and that becomes what we call legislating from the bench, which is, I mean, the implication is that, right? Like if you say that oh, the law is injustice, I'm assuming that it means that you have to do something about that, right? Like, something has to be done. You're not going to say that the law isn't justice, the law isn't justice, and then not do anything and say that the law isn't justice, but I'm not going to do anything about that. Like, if you're like a social justice advocate, Like I know many people who are social justice advocates. You want justice to be advanced, and you want things to change, right? But as I said, there's this system in place for a reason, and you have to go through certain measures and go through certain hoops, and oftentimes people don't like hearing that.
I think you made a very good point. And I just want to close off because we're running short of time. It's already been 1 hour 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So some final questions is, do you have any books you recommend or any resources, podcasts you recommend for our listeners that they can learn more about your country or about law and society and how laws should be enacted, or not how they should be enacted, but like a multitude of opinion and views on how the justice system and the legislation system should be?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of books in terms of like podcasts or books. Like I think there's like in general, there's not a lot I can say. Like obviously, if you want to learn about the culture of Bangladesh, read like Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore is like a big, like he's also like a literature Nobel Prize winner. Like he's a big figure in Bangladesh, and he's like you should definitely reread his stuff. Rabindranath Tagore. You definitely heard his name somewhere, if there's people in the audience who hear this. But otherwise, like if you want to, like in terms of books that I read in general, like I've read a lot of books. I think it's important to like read books that like go in your opposing worldview. Obviously, I'm a bit more right wing than people would probably guess, or like people in college are. But you know what? I've read the Communist Manifesto. Like I read Karl Marx's work. I read Das Kapital because I think it's important to know how, if you understand how your opposition thinks, then you're only going to make arguments to your own side, and it's not going to help. But I've also read Ayn Rand stuff. I've read Atlas Shrugged. I've read Fountainhead. I think some of her books are better than others. I've read obviously Milton Friedman's work in terms of economics. I've read Wealth of Nations, obviously Adam Smith. Like economics is a big part of my worldview, as you can see. But in terms of like, if you want to talk about like culture, I think that there's a lot of books out there that they talk about like culture in general. Actually, I have a lot. I have a lot of books right here that I can show. Just give me a second. Like I obviously have a lot of books about Austrian economic of like these.
Austrian economics.
What?
Okay.
What?
Austrian economic, like that's a more niche topic.
Yeah, but that's like the more of the spot that I aspire to, you could say. I also have books like The Wealth of Nations, obviously, but I also have, for example, I definitely recommend John Locke. Read John Locke. Read the Second Treatise of Government. You need to read this book. I think a lot of people, they don't read John Locke. And they like it's really obvious, especially in Marianopolis. A lot of people don't read John Locke, like natural rights, natural law, all that stuff. You need to know it. Okay, like that's really important in my opinion. And obviously, I have like the classics, 1984, Fahrenheit 451, all that stuff. And also this book that people may not know, right here, right now, it's a book by Stephen Harper, former Prime Minister of Canada, that I got. It's a pretty good book. I read it. He talks about a lot of stuff like it talks about Asia and economics and culture, and I think that's definitely a good read. And one last book I'd recommend is this Manufactured Consent by Noam Chomsky. This version is in French, but I don't know what the English one is. But the manufacturing consent, it's about how media manufactures consent, how media basically, oftentimes they drive opinion by being opinionated itself, like, how we talk now about left-wing media, right-wing media. Like before they were like, oh, newspapers are just newspapers, right? Like they're just supposed to give the news, not like opinionate from their platform. But now we have left-wing media, right-wing media, and I think Noam Chomsky is definitely hit the nail on the head when it comes to that. The Manufactured Consent is definitely a book that I recommend a lot of people to read. And actually, I'm sorry I'm taking so much of your time, but one last book, okay?
No problem.
One last book. One last book is this is a book I read in English class when I was in high school. Sold. It's about this girl who got sold into prostitution. Basically, it's her story from Nepal. Okay, and I think in a lot of ways this is like a very common story for where I come from. Okay, so you should definitely give it a read. Maybe you'd understand a bit better. When I was in high school, this became like a huge meme kind of because a lot of stuff in the book was like people are not familiar, and when people aren't familiar, often we use humor to like talk about things we're not familiar with, and this became meme, but like it's not funny. Like a lot of the stuff that happens is like really sad in the book, and you kind of that's all my that's the book I recommend. Obviously, my bookshelf is like big, but this is the few books that I definitely would recommend people to read. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking your time with us.
No
It was
problem.
really a pleasure.
Yeah,
Well,
I took a lot more of your time than I think I should have, but
no, it's okay.
yeah,
And it was
I
really, really fun.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, I had fun doing this too. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. Huh?
No, thank you for coming.
I mean, especially the fact that you interviewed Deborah Chu and you're gonna interview David O'Keefe next week. I think it's an honor to be here. Compared to the caliber of people you're interviewing, I'm like a nobody. So
No, I think you bring a really good another point of view to our podcast because, colleges are more left wing these days. So I think it's really important to get as you said, the opposing view on things. So I think it's really good that you're here. No, thank you.
Good and funny point about that is that when I'm in college, like around Marianopolis, like people they're like, yeah, they hear right wing, they're like, oh my god, you must be like a Nazi, like a racist person who like hates immigrants, and you want like women to not have rights, and like it's like The Handmaid's Tale. By the way, you should definitely read The Handmaid's Tale. But they assume it's like that's your worldview, but like no, they don't realize that there's a spectrum. There's different things in the right wing as there is in the left wing. I'm like, what do you think? Do you want me to say that left wing is like all these pink-haired college kids who like want to like censor everything? Like, is that what you want me to like assume about you? Like, that's the equivalent of like what the other side is kind of doing. But I think that when I have conversations with people and I'm like, oh, this is my policy, this is what I advocate for. Even I have a lot of like people who are like more left wing. They're like, oh, I agree with you on all this stuff, right? Like, yeah, this makes sense. That just shows that we have heterodox views, and people are not bound by labels. Like, when people say I'm left wing, right wing, libertarian, authoritarian, I'm a socialist, I'm a capitalist, I'm communist. Like, those are just words. Like, those are just terms. I think it's more important your policy, your ideology. What do you think? Your worldview. And when I talk about the specifics, when I talk about policies and worldviews with people who you would think are pretty far on the left, they're like, oh yeah, no, I agree with you on this, I agree with you on that, I agree with you that, yeah, you're right, the government shouldn't have that much power, you're right that this is on immigration, we cannot have open borders, obviously. And in that way, like, when you make the arguments, when you talk to people in a normal way, and you don't like talk down to people, you talk with people, and when you discuss, you don't even have to change minds sometimes, because oftentimes you find out that people agree with you more than you think. You talk with people, and you would assume, you wouldn't think, you're like, oh my god, this guy is like right wing. No one agrees with him because the college is like 90% or 95% left wing, right? Like, everyone thinks that like socialism is like the future, and like Karl Marx is like his revolution is gonna happen, and people are gonna overthrow the government like tomorrow. But when you get back to like in like not fantasy world, like the reality, and you talk about like real stuff to real people, and you're like, look, this is the policies that I advocate for, this is what I want when I talk about, this is why I got into politics, and this is my worldview. They're like, yeah, you're not, I kind of agree with you, you're right.
Thank you everyone who tuned in to listen. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we did during the interview.
If you liked this episode, learned something, or just want to help out a bunch of students, please leave a review, write a comment, and share this on social media. If you are listening to this on YouTube, please subscribe and write to us in the comments.
All the books and other resources recommended by the interviewee are in the podcast description/video description depending on your platform, and depending on when you see this, you might be able to use our affiliate link to purchase them.
The Marianopolis Addendum podcast is actively seeking local sponsors here in Montreal, so if you are interested, please contact us at the email linked in the description. All the profit generated by this podcast will go back to fund our club's activity. If we have any surplus, they will be donated at the end of every month to a local charity.
This episode was edited by Henry.
And the artwork is done by Camilla Huang.
The producers and guests associated with this episode may express their opinion, but this podcast does not support any political parties. We only aim to bring different perspectives on different issues through the free exchange of opinions and ideas.
We look forward to seeing you at our next broadcast. Cheers!